Hello guys, this is Abdurrahman Gilal. We've been learning about object-oriented programming paradigms using Java language, and today I realized to extend our knowledge further into understand a slightly advanced topic in object-oriented programming. So the first thing I wanted to just give you a quick recap, that what is class. We understood that a class is a template that basically carries out certain common attributes and properties and some behaviors. So let me draw something quickly for you so that you can see like what I basically mean out of it. We saw that a class is having three things. One is the name, and then we've got some states or attributes, and then we've got some methods or behavior, something like that. So whenever we design any class, we are supposed to give it a name. So last week we understood in our last presentation, sorry, that whenever we wanted to make any class, we just give it a keyword class and then we can put the class name. It is a good practice to keep the first letter of the class as a capital letter like A, B, C. And then we have to just give it a parenthesis as a boundary of the class or as a body of the class. And then anything that we create here is a member of the class. For instance, if I am creating any, how to say, any variable or any method such as A, B, C, all of them are the member of the class. There are certain situations where we'll be learning that we can have a class within the class that is called outer class and inner class. But right at the moment, we are not supposed to learn about that. So let's say if we have these variables or methods. So I'm not saying method. Method is a behavior here, and this variable is a state here. So sometimes whenever we want to use the class, so we have to create its object. So object is a fundamental concept where in Java or any object-oriented programming language, that basically object represents a real-world entity. For instance, I have a class called students class. So there are 1,000 students here with us these days. So every student has, let's say student name, and every student has let me just quickly say name, and every student has its ID. Let's say student ID. Let me just quickly say an integer. Sorry, it should be small. Okay, so it's a student ID. Okay, so these are the two, let's say we got two states or properties or attributes of class student. For instance, I make student here. So this is my class student, right? So now every student has his own name, every student has got its own ID. So this is now when I make object, basically I assign values to it. So every time anybody is using, so they create their own values to it. So that's what where we are going to initialize how to say an object of a class. So object we learned quickly in our previous recordings that in order to create object, we have to use class name such as student here, and then any name. For instance, this is called XYZ student, and then we use a keyword called new, and then we once again call the student, and then we give it a parenthesis. So I told you this is a constructor. So what is constructor? This is what we are going to learn. That now we are going to access this class creating using its special method constructor, and now any property or properties that are there in the class are basically going to be initialized using the constructor method. So today's presentation I will try my best to give you a clear understanding about the constructor, that what is constructor, and how does it work, and what are the different types of constructor available in Java programming language. So the first of all, what is the definition of a constructor? Just to once again give you a basic definition, that is a constructor is a special method or a special type of method that is used to initialize objects. So object, once again, is an instance of class. So class is a template, such as a student is a class. Abdul is the object of that class. So now if you want to initialize the object, you initialize an object, you have to use the constructor method, right? So constructor are called when an object of a class is created, and they can be used to set initial values for the objects attributed to perform any other necessary setups, right? So quickly give you the type of constructor. So there are basically three types of constructor. Number one, we call it a default constructor. And the number two, we've got a parameterized constructor. I'm sorry about my spells and this writing style. Parameterized constructor, and the last one is a copy constructor. Sorry, copy constructor, right? So default constructor, with the word we can see like it is something that is by default called, such as you did by calling, let's say, student or student like x, y, z equals to new, and then you call student. So this is the by default one. That's what we do not create. It's actually there, even if we wanted to, wish or not, but this will be there. And then there is another one that is a parameterized one, which means that we will be passing some parameter values. So just to give you a quick recap of the concept that you learned, the method. So method is a kind of a function in Java programming where you can have some values that we can pass into the parentheses, and there is something that can a function or a method return. So this is where we are always writing void, let's say main, and then we write a string, parentheses or square brackets and args, if you remember. So sorry. So basically, this is what I call parameter, right? The parameter is the value that goes into the body of the into the body of a method from external world. So anybody who is trying to use the method, if they want to give you something, they will be giving you through parameters. So parameters are, a way by which we receive values from external world. So there are sometimes we have conditions such as we have private, how to say, variables, or we've got private, methods. So it's not easy for us to just receive value by this dot. So it's not going to happen, right? So just quickly understand that the parameterize is the one that will be receiving values here. How will it be happening? I'm going to just, shortly, how to say, develop using Java language. So last one is a copy constructor. As a copy constructor, remember my words, is a special, once again, type of constructor which receives object as a parameter. So nothing more different than parameterized constructor, but it receives object itself instead of receiving how to say, individual values. So object, once again, is a type of variable, I could say. It's a bigger variable which contains attributes such as states, like variables or anything, and the method itself. So it's a big one, right? It's a composite type of thing, right? So when I pass object as a parameter, so I'm gonna say it's a copy constructor, right? So let's say Abdul is one object of a student class, and there will be Ahmed is a second object of this class. So Ahmed can be passed through the, Abdul constructor. Let's say if I say Abdul constructor is Abdul, sorry, let's say Abdul is a, let me redraw it. Okay, so let's say student, and I made it Abdul. This is me, right? And I make new, and now I put student here once again because this is my class, and I pass here any other, let's say, parameter, but that is an object. So this is called but this was object. So I created Ahmad here. Let's say this is Ahmad and new and the student. And we may pass some values here like Ahmad or etc. So this is a parameterized constructor, and this is a copy constructor because this is copying Ahmad like completely object into it. So how are you going to develop them? So let me quickly come here and let's start developing the coding. Okay. If you got any question at any time, just leave me the comments. I'll try my best to answer you. So let's say first of all, I'm gonna just create a Java class. So just let me, I'm gonna make it construct class. So I want constructor class just for our understanding. Okay, in constructor class. Okay, so let me just extend. Okay, in the constructor class, I am just gonna better I do not create a constructor class. I should create student class for our how to say clear understanding. So I'm gonna make a student as a class. Okay, there you go. So a student usually have some names. So I'm gonna say student has got oh, okay, student name and student has ID. So let's say student ID. This is making it a simple one. We are not doing anything in it, right? So let me quickly jump back to the main class and how we actually make the class, like public, sorry, class, main. Okay, so here we say public, static, void, man, the string, args or arg, anything that you prefer. And then here that you're gonna simply make a constructor here. So how do we make the constructor? By just calling a student class, the student, let's say I'm gonna make Abdul, and we're gonna use new keyword and then Abdul, sorry, student, and that's it. So now any value that I want to have it or in it is gonna be going to be visible here. We can print, so such as if I want to assign some initial values to it, let's say null, null, let's say. Null. Oh, 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 sorry. Let's say 0. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, great. Okay, so here we got nothing because we didn't display anything. So let me quickly display something for you to see like if this, so the student name equals to plus we have create Abdul dot name. So let's say if it null comes out here in here, then it means it works fine. So sorry about my system speed. Yeah, there you go. You're gonna see that it's null coming out here. That's a good thing. That means class is working. So this is the by default constructor. So now I'm gonna twist a bit because not necessary that every time we receive the constructor, we have to have its default value. So sometimes it's possible default value, but sometimes it's possible that we do not have default value. We have some value that is the name of the student. So how are we going to do that? So there is now we are going to twist into the constructor. So we do not know if a caller function or caller method is actually going to pass some values, but that's also possible that the caller method is just going to going to use it. So let me just quickly grab it. And so I am gonna do the same thing here. You must remember that the constructor class is always public class. It cannot be private because that's a special method. So it has to be always, how to say, public. So let me see. Okay, now I know that I have two values which I can pass, right? So it's a student name as well as this integer, sorry, student ID. So let me say like a string, any student, any value. Let's say I passed in the X and I say integer and I received in Y. So these are my values. So let me make them private so nobody can actually see them in any class. It is only going to be used in that particular class, which is going to give us a benefit that whenever we wanted to use it, so we have to remember that we do not let callers to access our variables, but to access our methods, right? So just for the quick understanding. So this constructor now is going to set some values. Okay, for the time being, do not let them make private so that we will learn private when we learn setter and getters. Okay, so let's see how we're gonna twist the values here. I'm gonna say student name equals to X, right? And I'm gonna say student ID equals to Y. Okay, remember my word. If you wanted to make it in a better codes, you can write this, which means the same, like if you are calling from the same class, right? So now student X and Y, whatever we pass into that parameters are going to be assigned to that X variable and Y variable, and then as X and Y will set the values. So let me call this constructor first, where I have Abdul first, and then I created a student called the student constructor, and we saw that we got no value. So I'm going to change this as a first student. Let me just, because I'm going to pass my values later on. So here I'm going to say first student, right? So the student name is going to be surely null. And now I'm going to create another object. I'm going to do that. I have to just do like this. So how do we have to do is that we have to pass, how to say, my values, which is called Abdul, and I can pass my values such as Abdul, and my ID is 123, let's say. So by default, it's showing me error. Why it's showing me error? Let's run it first, and I'm gonna tell you why it's an error here. So let's run it and then call Abdul here and student name. So run it. Oh, sorry. The reason is that because we have made this constructor changed, and then we have made it sure that it has to be coming through, how to say, a string and integer, which is not receiving any value. So how to solve that? Let's say we should create another constructor, which is, sorry, which is not receiving any values. So it just do like that. Okay, so there you go. So here I make it simply, let's say now, and this one 0. So this is going to actually do the same thing. If I remove these values, so basically, what I'm going to say here is that I created a student class and I created two variables, student name and student ID. So the first constructor, if there is no parameter passed, so there is this by default is being called. If there is a parameter passed, so we should receive parameters in variable X and Y, and then we pass the X and Y to the, how to say, to the variables that we have declared here. So this setup is basically like called, overriding. So we will be learning this later on. So for the time being, we just quickly see like how can we actually, are we successful in running or no? Let's see. So the first one should not be returning any value. This is we expected. The second one should be returning as Abdul. So illegal expression because we have this without any values. So let's just quickly run it. So you're gonna see here. Yep. So the first one, if you remember, we discussed it must not be returning us. It must not be returning us because when we call the first student, so student has to be empty because it has no value into it. But when we call Abdul class, so it has passed Abdul and 1, 2, 3. So if you see here, you're gonna see Abdul and 1, 2, 3. So that's quite clear enough that we have proper calling of constructor. So let me call another student I mean this the same class with another student name, as I say. Let me make a constructor called John. So I am going to pass values like John, and I'm going to pass value like 231. So here I will call John. So student name is definitely it's John, and then it's going to have student ID 231. So it's easy for us. Like now, if the constructor is successfully being called, so which means what we can do is that we can collect. Sorry, is there any problem? Okay, John is never used. For sure, John is never used because my spell is wrong. So it's better if John or John. It's the same, right? So let's run it. So there you go. So if you see here, so we have first one is a null, second one is Abdul, and the third one is a John. So we realize that constructor can receive parameters and cannot receive parameters. So that's just a quick understanding. So now let me quickly jump and tell you that how can we actually make it a slightly better when we have some previously created objects and we wanted to pass it to the constructor, right? So there will be something slightly twisting that constructor from this, sorry, object from this class is going to pass value to the other class, right? So we have created John and we realize this John is a wrong spell. So we are going to make another John. So we have to remember that we have to create a constructor here, which will receive a student as a, so the name of the class should be here because this is going to happen as the parameter. So let's say I'm gonna make so just a object so that I am sure that anything that is being passed from this main class will be received as an object here. So we don't have to create how to say any any value into it because we know that it's going to keep not only attributes but as well as a method. So I just make it object right at the moment, right? Okay, so now. Okay, so we know that this student object, this object, when we pass here, such as we pass, let me let me create an object here, which is going to pass. So this is John with different spell. We realize that this was an error, so let's make John as a uh, you know, different object instead of editing into it. So we have either a way that we can use getter and setter, or we can make another object. Let's just quickly see that how we pass objects into it. So we know this John was an object to us, right? So we just passed this. So now when we created John as this object, so there were two variables. If you see here, this was the constructor when we called to make the John, right? When we made the John X and Y, so this was the constructor. The first one has no parameter, second one is X and Y. So basically this constructor was called when we made John. So John has two variables such as student name and student ID, right? So now, when I said object, which means now anything that is there in the object. So for time being, we have only two things in the object. So right, this object will be carrying student name as well as student ID. So let me quickly tell you that how am I going to use it. So I'm going to say object dot. So you should, sorry, you should be seeing here that we have a student name. Now this will be assigned to student name. And then the same way we have object, object dot student ID. So now student ID is assigned to student ID for student. But here's the slight difference is that previous one we were passing parameters, but here we are passing objects, right? So let me quickly go back here and try to see if there is any change in the results. I anticipate there won't be any change because we have just copied the, how to say, the constructor, oh sorry, the object into the constructor. So John is passed here. So now I'm going to print this John, not the John, right? So let's run it. Okay, great. You see here, this is Abdul, this is Johan, this is Johan. So it's because, why? It's because I did not change any value of John. So that's the reason I just passed through. So both of the time I called the object John or John, it is actually receiving and returning as the same value. I'm not passing any value here. So this constructor is called copy constructor. And this constructor is called parameterize, and this constructor is called same parameterize, and this is called default constructor. So just to give you a quick understanding or recap, so in order to make an instance of a class, we use constructors. So object is one of the instances of the class. So the constructor are a specialized method that helps us to make objects, right? So the constructor may receive value, may not receive any parameters, and may receive objects. So if they receive nothing, so we call them default. And then if they receive some parameters, so we call them parameterized. And then if they receive objects, so we call them copy constructor. So that's all for today presentation. I will be trying to explain you the method called getter and setter in the next presentation. If you got any confusion or question, please do not hesitate to drop me a comment or question. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.